So we are so glad to have Nina back with us. Nina was a speaker at our Bristol WCS a few years ago when she was over visiting the UK. She actually lived in the UK for 15 years and has now since gone back to Squamish in Canada. She has been a qualified physiotherapist for 20 years and with so much experience in treating climbers in particular. And something we always get asked her, do you know somebody who understands climbers' fingers, who's here, who's there? The great thing is about Nina is that she kind of invented telemedicine. I'm going to give you that. She's been doing consultations on Skype for ages before anybody thought of it for COVID. So that's probably worth bearing in mind if you need a specialist at some point. So without any further ado, while people are still coming in, I am just going to hand straight over to Nina. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I'm really thrilled to, speak again and join up with all you ladies. And I just to prove that I really was there. I don't know if you can see, but I have this on my desk ever since that 2017 symposium that we spoke at, and I got to meet Lynn Hill. So there we go. I think of you ladies every day at work. And yeah, I've got her signed autograph here that maybe some of you also have from the last one or 2 years ago. Right, so I'm going to crack on. I'm happy to share my slides with Rebecca. And obviously I'll save some time for question and answer. If things are going too fast, you can always get in touch with me later as well. So here we go. D present. Okay, so I like to use my Instagram account. I'm using it as a library of exercises and a way to learn and share information. I'm really enjoying that. I've also got some info on my website, but good idea to follow me, and I'll have some videos that kind of support the things that I'm talking about today that you can follow up on. So I thought it'd be interesting to just kind of tell you, what I see most often, and then I was going to kind of order it, according to what I see most often. So, tendinopathies is obviously a really big one, and whether that be a tear or an actual just tendinopathy, really common in the shoulders, elbows, the finger flexors, sometimes the extensors, but definitely more flexors. Pulley sprains, super common, along with collateral ligament injuries. So this is a little bit different because a pulley is classified as a ligament along with the collateral ligaments, but you treat pulleys very similar to flexor injury. And both often the two are kind of combined. Hamstring strains, heel hooks, a lot more common these days with bouldering and this kind of gymnastic style of bouldering and indoor training and climbing. And especially here in Squamish, I see a lot of it. There's a ton of heel hooks going on with the bouldering and climbing around here, the sport climbing and the bouldering. So I see a lot of hamstring strains. A little bit different to your normal running and football hamstring strains. Knee and ligament, LCL, meniscus. So you get these LCL, lateral collateral ligament injuries with the torsion of heel hooking. So probably more than other sports actually, where you get these LCL, lateral collateral ligament injuries, which is quite interesting. And a lot of meniscal little tears or irritations, really common in climbing with all the compression and twisting that you get. Ankle sprains, instability. I've just had an ankle repair that you'll see on the Instagram account for a really serious instability that I had for 20 years from being a volleyball player and being hypermobile, but also falling off Crescent Arete in the Peak District in my early 20s. So that really did my ankle in, and now I finally got a repair. But I see a lot of ankle sprains and fractures and different things from bouldering. And then, less frequent, but I definitely do see kind of traumatic injuries from falls, belaying, spotting, and a really interesting one in Canada here in Squamish. A girl was belaying a heavier guy and he fell off, you know, at the second bolt and landed on her shoulder and, you know, had a really traumatic shoulder injury. It was quite interesting with nerve damage and all sorts. So, you know, they do happen, unfortunately, and sometimes can be prevented. So that I have a little slide on that. So tendinopathies, we could, I mean, this could be a whole 2-hour presentation in itself. So I just try to pick out the kind of like most relevant things that I feel are relevant. So your relative shoulder strength, and this is important for fingers, elbows, shoulder girdle. You know, I say that your elbows and fingers and actual even climbing performance is only as strong as your shoulder girdle, you know. So in order, you know, to kind of like do some shoulder assessing and strength training never is a bad thing. Chicken winging. So this is something I've been going on for many years about. It's that kind of pose, and you'll see, I'll have pictures where the elbow comes out and the shoulder pops forward. This is a common technical postural thing that happens sometimes that can load the shoulder, elbows, and fingers unnecessarily, that people should be watching out for. Technique, and again, this is hopefully being covered in your other modules. Good climbing technique and coaching and video analysis can really help prevent a lot of unnecessary tendon overload and strain. So another reason why you get tendinopathies is because of this repetitive strain in either not ideal positions or postures, but also just simply too much volume and or intensity of training and climbing, and it goes for kind of anything. And also you can have traumatic overload to tendons as well, where you have a foot slip and you overload, you're hanging on for dear life and you overload fingers, elbows, shoulders, and you can also overload cartilage as well as the tendon. But intensity and volume is really something that you want to think about with regards to climbing, but also with exercise, physiotherapy, strength training. So that relative shoulder strength that I was talking about, you know, is your shoulder blade and shoulder girdle strong enough for what you're pulling on? And actually just, I think I'm going to try it this way. Instead of sharing the screen on my, I'm going to just try showing you, and you can go on the Instagram to look at this a little bit quicker. But so this I posted because it was kind of interesting. I thought, oh, this would be a good drill for on the wall. And so if you watch my shoulder blade coming off my rib cage, and I thought, ooh, that's kind of neat. And again, you can go and look at it closer. So I have one foot on the wall and one hand, and I wanted to demonstrate good technique, like a body roll, like what you're meant to do when you swim. So you're using the rotation of your whole body and driving with your foot. I'm also pulling quite hard with my elbow, and I'm loading my fingers. I found it quite fingery, this particular move that I was doing. And then when I watched the video, I thought, oh my God, my shoulder blade. So then I thought, no, this is too tough. So what I did was I put both feet on to make it easier. I kept the same handhold, made it easier, and now my shoulder blade is not popping off. So this is about the right intensity, and my elbow is also not yanking as hard, and I'm really doing this body roll technique better now. So, you know, if I kind of kept carrying on with the first high intensity way of climbing, I was straining my elbow and fingers more than I needed to. Okay, and this is kind of like an example of what I mean by relative shoulder strength for what you're climbing. And then like another example would be, you know, like a lat shrug. So I'm my left lat and is weaker than my right. And again, this was just from doing video analysis. I didn't actually know this was going on because I wanted to just simply demonstrate a shrug. And then I thought, oh my gosh, that's my dicky flexor elbow thing. And you can see how I'm yanking more on the elbow because my left lat is weaker than my right. So then I played around. So I ended up doing lock offs, like a lat lock off to get stronger. But here I was just kind of playing around. So I was hitching my hip and trying to think about my lat a little bit more on the left side. And now I'm kind of, it's somewhat better form. And then I worked on lat pulls and like a wide lock off to engage my lats. And then, you know, so this was like a month later with a better tan because this was now in the spring. And so I'm doing it much better now, you know? So again, it's just assessing your shoulders a little bit goes a long way. And then I posted something recently in light of this topic. You know, so these are kind of nice tests. So like a kind of a one arm assisted lock off at 90, one arm assisted lock off at 120. So you can kind of test your strength and form, right versus left. Do you have any asymmetries? You know, so this is kind of like a trap and rotator cuff test that I do, and a kind of front cuff, your anterior cuff test. It's kind of like an advanced rotator cuff thing, and like a one arm row, you know, right versus left, you know, so the hands are easy. So it's a big handle, you know, assessing the shoulder girdle. So those are just kind of ideas and options. So that's what I mean by relative shoulder strength. Yeah, and just saying that, you know, if your shoulders, your shoulder girdle with your core aren't strong enough for what you're getting on, your fingers and elbows will suffer, and your shoulder. So that body roll drill versus pulling with your arm, IG means Instagram. So if you were to have the slide, then you've got the, you know what to look for now on the Instagram account. And then also, you know, this kind of antagonist concept that, again, I've been talking about for years, and a lot of people talk about, you know, the being strong. So you want to be strong in pulling, pressing, and lifting. And if you do trad climbing, bouldering, and sport climbing, you actually need all of that strength, because sometimes you're pressing under a roof to, you know, hold yourself in, or you're pushing down on top of the boulder. So there's a few strength and conditioning coaches that I follow quite closely and take courses, you know, like Tyler Nelson. You know, he doesn't like that word antagonist, because, you know, you're meant to use all your muscles with climbing, really. But at the end of the day, you know, you don't press and lift as much as you pull. I still will say that. And so I quite like assessing and just staying on top of pressing strength. So yes, push-ups, but soon they become a little bit too easy, but pushing in different directions. So offset push-ups, diamond push-ups, incline, decline push-ups. I really like a landmine press, because you can do it, again, unilaterally. And you can either do it as a strict press or like a body rotation, which I'm allowing the body to rotate here and really emphasizing the shoulder blade moving with the arm. So basically pressing and lifting, you know, like a dumbbell, you know, dumbbell overhead press, a barbell press, any kind of pressing and lifting. Very, very good to assess and see if you're strong like you are with your pullers. So yeah, so examples, you know, one arm hanging rows, the Turkish get-ups I really like, because they're unilateral and they're all about rotation, and you can compare right versus left. archer slides, like a star plank. So instead of just doing a plank like this, you're like in a star or in an I. You know, they tend to be a little bit harder and more varied. And in an archer slide, you can do those on the TRX, or on the floor, which is probably more convenient. I just wanted to check the time there, but so it would be this post. So that's like an overhead static press where I'm really working the end range press. And then the slide, you know, looks a bit like this, and kneeling is easier. So you would kind of like tuck your elbow in, and so that's a T and a Y and an I. So again, variety, you know, is really key. So that's what I mean by an archer press. So yeah, so the hanging lat shrugs and the pulls, assisted or not. So in my video, I had a band under my feet to assist initially. No problem with that. So yeah, so with your kind of shoulder assessing, you want to see, are you symmetrical? Do you have any pain with that particular exercise? Does it need modifying? The video analysis is super useful. Highly recommend doing video analysis, especially it's so useful these days. You just put your camera there, get someone to video, have a look at yourself, or you know, or get your therapist to do so. Yeah, are you overusing and yanking at the fingers or the elbows more than you are, you know, engaging your torso and shoulder girdle? So another thing that I believe causes tendinopathies and quite a lot of climbing issues is the chicken winging. So it's this, you know, and actually it's not too bad. It's probably more on this side. You know, this is actually pretty good. You know, I would maybe say what would happen if she just tucked her elbow in a little bit more. This arm, you can't really see her shoulder, but it's more chicken winging on this side. I asked Jake, because he takes phenomenal photos here in Squamish, and I asked him for a bunch of photos at last minute, and I just said chicken winging, you know. So the chicken winging is this, and I've got a few more here, I'll show you. So also known as elbow flaring. And again, we'd have to go sideways. So he's kind of in a Gaston. So you do find that kind of, you know, so a Gaston with an elbow flare, you know, is really hard on the shoulder. And it's okay when you've got super beefy shoulders with really good flexibility. But even then, you know, 20 years of it, it's hard on the shoulders. And climbers, now that I've been a physio for, you know, 21 years, and I've seen a lot of climbers, and there's scans, you know, scans coming back, like most climbers have rotator cuff tears and labral damage to some degree, you know, especially if they've been climbing for a long time and are elite. And some of them are more painful than others. But the ones that have beefy muscles are the ones that are in less pain for sure, and balanced muscles. But if you can, with the chicken winging, if you can just simply tuck your elbows in a touch, even if it's a degree, you're going to engage your shoulder girdle more and lessen that kind of shearing, which I'm going to show you in a couple of slides. So just tuck your elbows in, whatever position you're in, tuck them in a little more. And even if you're not feeling shoulder pain or wrist pain or strain or finger strain, if you're tired or struggling, tuck your elbows in, and I bet you'll feel stronger and maybe even pull the move off. So Jake didn't get back to me, but I said, oh, is that, oh no, because it was his right shoulder. So it wasn't this one, because he came in with a shoulder problem. But anyway, so this is like a shouldery move. And oops, a little gap there of the shoulder blade, but you know, so this is, yeah, kind of like a chicken winging thing. So I'm just curious if he snatched for that and then pulled his elbow into the wall a little bit more, he would be stronger and less strenuous on the tendons. And then I had to throw in a picture of me. This is a long time ago, Smith Rock. So I'm not really chicken winging here, but I could have tucked my elbow in a touch more and I would be stronger and closer to the wall. So I thought, let's throw that in. Because I was bad at that. I chicken winged all over the place. And I've got a messed up shoulder that I got to stay on top of, you know. I wish I did all this 20 years ago when I started climbing, you know. I've got a lot of pictures of me doing it. And I'm hypermobile, so it makes it worse. It's just easier to do all those kind of things. So this is what happens when you chicken wing. So the front of the shoulder pops forward, stretches the ligaments and the tendons. You get the tightening of an already tight posterior chain and rotator cuff. It's not centered. And it's okay, but it's, you know, with high load repetitively over lots of years, it's not ideal actually. So this is kind of more what we call like a centered glenohumeral joint or shoulder. And obviously the blade plays a big role in all this. And I do a lot of blade work. And I actually almost prefer working on the blade to the rotator cuff. And I do a lot more push, pull, lift, blade work than I do rotator cuff work with people now. Because rotator cuff exercises I find just aggravate people, especially when they're sore. So finger beaking. So onto the fingers. And again, I could do a whole talk on the shoulder, a whole talk on the elbow, a whole talk on the fingers. But okay, I thought it'd be worth mentioning this beaking concept, where it happens with and you can't really see it that well. And eventually I'll post it on Instagram a bit better, but because the index and the middle finger are longer, you get this thing where, so for instance, and this comes from a Beastmaker. I first read about this on the Beastmaker, you know, advice there for hanging. And I like the word, and I thought it was really interesting where, you know, to make room to be even with the smaller fingers, you get this half crimp or crimping pose. And then he's also hyperextending where he's taped. So he's beaking and he's a bit deviated and hyperextending. But anyway, so it's just worth noting. And again, sometimes you're going to beak and that's okay. But if you're on the fingerboard and training, you know, try to maybe not beak. And it doesn't happen when you're forefinger crimping or half crimping. It's more when you're open handing stuff. But, you know, if it means that you can get 4 fingers on and then you beak, well, it's better to have 4 fingers than just 2 sometimes, right? So it's kind of pros and cons to every situation. But I like to train all sorts of different things on the fingerboard. And I think fingerboarding is essential to prevent finger injuries. And so you can do this. You don't have to be able to hang full body weight on a board. You can simply do these pulls. So they're called overcoming isometrics or finger pulls where your feet are on the floor. You can do this for lock-offs as well, where you simply just, and I'm actually starting to really play with this because I used to think they were a bit boring, but that's why being injured is so lovely, because it forces you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And because I can't quite hang on my fingerboard, so I was doing these rows playing around with that because I needed to have my foot elevated for quite a long time, whereas now it can hang down, but I don't feel comfortable just like fingerboarding yet, just the jumping down, it's not quite the right height. So I'm just, you know, I'm just simply feet on the floor and just pulling down on all these edges on my Beastmaker that I can't hang body weight at the moment, but I'm just exerting an effort. And that's totally legit. So, and I'm playing around with, you know, my hand position, how my, like, where is my hand and, you know, relation to my wrist, and on my left, it wants to do kind of funny things. So I'm trying to like even that out. And you can really do that when you're just, your feet are on the floor and you're just pulling. So you can kind of play around with postures of your fingers on the board. So this is back three. So it's like an example. So my feet are on the floor and I'm just pulling. So back three is quite neat to train. I think it's a good idea. Neil Gresham talks a lot about it, and Beastmaker, and I mean, probably Ava Lopez, but I don't know. I've not seen her talk about it, but a lot of people talk about it. And I like the concept because the ring and pinky pulleys are thinner. So you have to rely on the strength of your hand muscles and fingers more. And so, you know, what better way to do it but on the board in a controlled kind of way. Yeah, and then you know, with the back three, you kind of don't need to get this beaking as much. Obviously, it depends on the edge size. When you go on the really small one, then you might have to beak in the open hand, or you would just do it a 2-finger with the pinky kind of next to. So the drop down version is more strenuous on the lumbrical tendons. It's good to have the fingers next to, so even if they're not being used, to be next to is better than like this. So that's kind of a little injury prevention thing. It's just strains your lumbrical tendons more with the fingers down. So yes, so these finger pulls, overcoming isometrics. I think following Tyler Nelson, C4HP on Instagram, he's great, and he does really awesome online courses and courses. I really love his work. It's very legit, scientific, based on strength and conditioning science, and yeah, he's good. So that finger beaking, yeah, most common, the longer fingers to fit in with the smaller, shorter ones. Yeah, I got that from Beastmaker. Yeah, and variety is the spice of life, you know, so people who are kind of like just always training on a 20 mil edge, you know, and Ava Lopez, you know, so she has her edges, you know, like where you have, I think she actually only says to do open on there, but they're bloody sharp, that transgression board, even her easier board I find is a bit sharp. But yeah, I just think back three, middle two with the, you know, that kind of thing. Just changing it up constantly is I think better for strength and performance and better for injury prevention. But if you want to be measurable and you're really wanting to measure something, then for a period, sure, you can just do the 20 mil edge or 30 mil edge or whatever. And when you're in rehab, you know, I will often just say, okay, just do the 30 mil for, you know, whatever, 4 weeks and reassess. But let's say in general, long term. And then, yeah, half crimp versus open hand. So it's going to depend on who you are. Like the younger generation climbers have been said, like, don't crimp, don't crimp. And so they, like a lot of the younger climbers I find are actually really strong in open hand. I'm old school. I started out crimping everything. And so my crimp is definitely stronger than my open. So I'm trying to work on that more now. And you can assess it on the fingerboard or with the strength measuring devices. I've got Tyler, like Exergio's strength gauge that I use, and I'm enjoying that. And yeah, I'm definitely weaker, although the open hand, you know, again, if it's 4-finger open, and if you're beaking a bit, don't worry about it too much. So I'm kind of after my 3-finger open and comparing it to my 4-finger half crimp, which, yes, you're meant to be a bit stronger with the half crimp because you've got that extra pinky on. But I think functionally, when you go to snatch something open hand, it's rare, or you need to also be as strong 3-finger, I think. So it's worthwhile doing the 3-finger open. So lower limb, yeah, heel hooks and hamstrings, see a lot of that. So I want to just talk a little bit about that, and then the lower limb biomechanics. There's like some easy stuff that is really proven by research now to be effective in helping to prevent injuries, especially in females. And then just a little word on bad landings and spotting and landing techniques, because unnecessary lower limb injuries happen because of that. So heel hooks, super fun to do, but you need to be strong in your hammies and your calves and your pelvis and your core. So as you can see, oftentimes the heel is, your hamstrings really stretched out, working on a stretch. So rehab and strength specifics for climbing, which are different to sprinting and like football, for example. So they tend to be more concentric versus eccentric loading. So you kind of want to train them concentrically, but it's also good to do some eccentric loading as well. They're often on a stretch, and so your hip is in flexion, so you have to work on that as well. So like deep hip flexion, like squats and deep lunges and bent over like good mornings and deadlifts and all that is good. It's useful for climbers. So, training isometric first. Yeah. So there's kind of like this big debate, do you start with isometric when you do rehab, concentric, eccentric? Where should we start with this? I think if you don't have a hamstring injury, concentric training is really useful to do, like bridges. So these are super functional and great to do. But if you are injured, if you're suffering with a hamstring injury, you need guidance. You need a therapist, because it's tricky. It's really tricky to know, even for the therapist. So a bridge, so to stay strong without an injury, these are great. So this is practicing a hip thrust, where you are thrusting, and it's kind of working your glutes more than your hamstrings, but your hamstrings are still working, but you're practicing this hip thrust that essentially you need to do for almost every move as a climber. And then, a concentric bridge, like a single leg bridge, is awesome to stay strong at. So you can put weight over you. I'm doing it centered, and I'm doing it leant over to the inside of my heel, and my pelvis is following the anchor point. And then I do the outer. So with lateral heel hooks, these kind of convoluted heel hooks where your foot is turned out, you're really using the outer hamstring. So it's really important not to neglect the two extremely strong protective hamstrings on the inside, your medial hamstrings. So I like doing this kind of like leant over inside bridge. So this is kind of more a concentric kind of way to work your hammy. And you have to visualize your hamstrings, and any physios out there, I like to use this as an analogy. You might find something different, but you've got, I kind of say they're like Santa's reins on a sleigh. And so your outer hamstring is pulling to gear where the reindeer have to go, and you've got the wind and whatever else, friction interfering, and your inner two hamstrings pulling, and they're kind of stabilizing and keeping the knee stable. And you want to use all three. So the two inner and the other at all times, even if you're doing these kind of like weird, like heel toe cam twisty things, where really it kind of engages your outer hamstring more. So you have to be careful not to let go of those inner hamstrings and be really dominant on that outer, because that's where you get the loss of the sleigh, and the knee ends up, that's where you can get these meniscus and LCL injuries, or one way to get it. So yeah. And anyone interested, we can talk about that further later. But yeah, basically keeping both hamstrings, outer and inner, strong is super important. And yeah, and for rehab, it's complicated. So sometimes, you know, it's good to start with isometrics and it's okay to go into pain. Some people, I think it's good to go into pain and then it's not actually. And sometimes I've had to go and change completely my hamstring rehab, and I leave hamstring rehab completely and just do core and squats and kind of static lunge, you know, split squat type things, and almost like knee rehab, and leave the hamstring altogether. And it's you get better results that way. So that's again a topic for another time. Yeah, training into pain when you're going through rehab. There's literature to show that this is useful for the lower limb tendinopathies and hamstrings, but not always. And it's going to depend on the case and the person. So this is the biomechanics that has been shown to be useful to prevent injuries. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years, very effective. So drop, jump, drop and land, tuck jumps. You know, so the, you're watching for the knees collapsing inwards. You're watching for hip drop. You're watching for a torso wobble and a sideways lean, stiff leg. Squats are a good kind of precursor to this. So this is that collapsing in, so you can see her torso, the torso lean, the pelvic lean, the knee collapse, the foot collapse. So this is something you can train in a squat, statically, dynamically, jumping off something, hopping up and down. So the, again, just to give you like an idea. So this is Rehab Science. This is not one of my posts. This is just something I've saved. So this is called a drop jump. And so they're doing lots of this kind of training. So you can just look in a mirror, video yourself. So you know, you can put a band around your knees to push out, or a foam roller between your knees, or just simply a mirror to watch what you're doing. And maybe she has to start out just doing squats with the bands and so on, and some strengthening first before doing this, or maybe she has to lower her step to make it easier. So if you train that, you can prevent knee injuries in sport. So good one. Falling and spotting, yeah. So I went to the Hive here in Vancouver, and they were amazing. And I love the UK walls. I love UK walls. I miss them. I miss a lot of things about the UK. But I never once had instruction, and maybe that's different now, but I don't remember ever being taught how to fall off a bouldering wall. You do an induction and learn about other things, and you tick things off and sign your initials. You don't read anything, you just sign. But at the Hive in Vancouver, they made you go up to the wall and demonstrate how to fall off and all this kind of stuff and teach you. And I thought, this is brilliant, amazing. And I never knew really about the motorcycle land, where you land on your heels and roll backwards with your chin tucked in and your arms in. I mean, that's what you do to prevent injury right there. So if you're not doing it at the walls, please start doing it. This is great. It takes 10 minutes and it might be annoying for people, but if it stops them from bashing their cheekbone into their knee, like I did once, you know, and all kinds of bad injuries can happen, right? So this, and maybe we don't have time, but again, if you just put that into YouTube, I do have it on my kind of like screen that I could like leave this and go to it. But this is a really good video on how to prevent, you know, injuries and little gymnastic techniques. But when you land, if you like back slap the thing, you slap your hands down and keep your chin in, and that takes some of the shock away. You don't get this whiplash, you know, and back whiplash and neck whiplash that I've seen quite a few times. But yes, the concept of landing more on the back of your heels, ankles flexed, chin tucked, elbows in, and roll backwards. Obviously, you can't do this necessarily outside bouldering, but in the gyms, man, that's effective. You know, I've seen elbow fractures, elbow dislocations, bad ankle injuries that just didn't need to happen. Yeah, this supine double break fall arm slap thing, that's great. Just watch that video. And then this side breaking fall, you know, so he does this, you know, like he slaps his hand on the side there. It's brilliant. And yeah, you want to keep your chin in when you fall. And avoid this like kind of reaching out with your arm, and like your feet like right together is not great. You know, and then lead falling climbing, like Hazel Finley does all those kind of like online courses and in-person courses on mental, but also like good lead fall technique. Because, you know, if you practice good falling, then your head gets better, you know, and that's a fact. And so I'm a big promoter of that, big promoter. And then the spotting, yeah. So spotting technique, you know, you kind of want to, I always thought it was kind of at the hips, but yeah, actually a bit above the hips is probably better. And you kind of want to like guide the person down. So kind of maybe aim around the armpits. But if it means that you're going to get a smack in the face or get a head injury or your shoulder dislocated, then you got to maybe not spot. And just to have a discussion about this with your climber, you know. So you got to protect the climber's head. So if they're falling, then, you know, just make sure that their head's not going to smack into a rock. Super important. And obviously you got to protect yourself as well. And yeah, and have a discussion like you would with lead climbing. You should have that discussion, you know, so how you're going to jump, you know, I want a dynamic fall. If I fall third clip, don't give me rope. Like have these chats with your belayer before. Yeah, and cover up nearby rocks if you're bouldering, and, you know, be aware that's in your peripheral vision. And yeah, you want to be pushing your climbers away and all the mat stacking, right? There's the whole, again, that's like a coach that could talk about that for an hour probably. And then I just was going to talk just briefly on the climbing in pregnancy, because I knew that that was kind of an interesting topic. And I've had 2 kids, you know, and one was a traumatic birth. My first one was, you know, I have a prolapse anterior and posterior. I wear a pessary. I thought that was worth mentioning. That saved my life, that thing, because I was going to have that mesh surgery. And then it just worked out. It was a mistake. I got my number changed, and they called me instead of sending me like a letter on my surgery time. And I'm so glad I didn't get it in the end. I might have to at some point, but the pessary is really working for me and strengthening. If you're pregnant, you can climb like you normally did, but I wouldn't add more. You're going to probably have to climb less. You got to just face the facts. And you got to listen to your body. And be wary of adrenaline surges. I know of some climbing friends that had miscarriages after like quite big lead falls in their first trimester, probably linked actually. The Diastasis Recti, everyone's going to get it, different degrees. Yes, if you're really exerting effort on steep climbing and ab training, potentially that's going to make it happen more, but there's no research to show that it does. And that, you know, you can work with this after pregnancy. It's okay. And same with the pelvic floor, but it's just going to depend on the birth. You know, mine was totally shot, but you know, I managed to climb 12B again last year, which is bloody amazing. You know, my daughter's she was 7 last year, so it took me 7 years, but I did it in the end, you know, got back to pre kids eventually. And that, yeah, you've got that ligament laxity in the second trimester that you've got to be aware of. And yes, your Kegels and women's health physio and Pilates and all that stuff is useful. But yeah, worth noting, because even the women's health physio here that I saw didn't talk to me about that pessary. It was the gynae lady. And then I just used those Kegel balls because I got so annoyed with this, like reading bedtime stories and pulling up your pelvic floor. You know, I want weights, you know, it's a bit like me in that pulling down with my feet on the floor. So I got those Kegel balls or whatever they're called. I can look it up now. And I, you know, and I couldn't stand up and hold the balls up in there. They would just slip out. And I thought, oh my God, okay, I am weak. So then I used those balls and tugged on them and pulled and did different kind of exercises that I made up. And I got stronger and I could, you know, hold the ball. So it was something objective for me that I needed. You know, and I started deadlifting 2 years ago, not just my body weight, but, you know, so it's all possible. But yeah, it's a whole discussion on its own probably, but that's it. So I'm going to go to question and answer. Should I stop sharing do I just press question and answer?
Yeah, if you stop sharing your screen, that would be great.
And stop sharing the screen. Okay, so, oh, whoops. So stop share. And then I see some questions. Answer live, type answer.
If you answer live, I'll make them go away.
Okay, so I'll answer live. Do you have recommendations for climbing after herniated disc? Answer live. Yes. So again, I think it would be useful to be assessed by a physio. But, you know, disc, if it really is like a herniated disc, I like the extension Mackenzie protocol as warm-ups and post-climbing exercises, but exactly which ones, it can be, you know, a little tricky. You've got to keep, you know, your hips strong and your core and things like the kettlebell swings, hip hinge patterns, super important. And this like hip thrusting in a way that's comfortable, and keeping the shoulder girdle, you know, like those kind of like lat shrugs, being strong in your lats will really help your back. Should I move on to the next one?
Sounds good.
Do I press done? Okay, done. So even in resting position, my shoulder pushes forwards. Oh, am I live here? Okay, and hopefully I'm live. So yes, so then, and yes, so a little bit of a degree of that is normal, but you should do those shoulder tests, you know, so how strong are you on all four? You know, can you hold 6 pounds like this for 5 seconds, you know, or 5 pounds or 4 pounds? And then from the front. So it's not just about, so the common mistake is that everybody thinks that they just need to do trap and posterior cuff work for that, but actually you need to also do anterior stabilization. So that's why in my shoulder post of tests, I included this throw and catch for the front of the shoulder, because you have to assess the front of the shoulder rotator cuff as well. So this kind of like, you know, type of thing. So your subscap, the strength of your subscapularis is also relevant, actually. It's not the bad guy in that situation. So what's the best way to train squats when you already have an ACL tear? Well, I'm going to post something. I just wanted to wait for a tuck video. So with squatting, God, there's a million ways to squat. You can split squat. You can squat with your knees bent over your toes, as long as, you know, unlike what a lot of people say, oh, don't bend, don't make your knees bend past your toes. So you can do this kind of squat where, you know, it's quite glute focused. It's a bit like a deadlift split squat. So, you'll see in a minute where I'm actually getting her to really flex her hip, and her knee is going past her toes, but it's, you know, in kind of a controlled way, and she feels her bum working with her knee, and she doesn't feel kneecap pain, you know. So there's a whole ton of ways. There's a box squat. There's, you know, so this is opposite, where her hip is behind her knee. So her knee is not going past her toes now. And this is like a single leg wall squat. So split squat, Bulgarian squat, wall squat, any kind of squat that doesn't hurt and feels good and works your butt is the one to choose. And there's a ton of squats out there. Heels raised, not decline on a wobble board, you know, all good. What's the best exercises for shoulder impingement? Well, you know, that's a big question. You know, do you have posterior capsule tightness? Do you have neck tension? Do you have scalene tension that's getting in the way with the impingement? You know, do you need this anterior strengthening because all you've been doing is this posterior rotator cuff? So it's complicated. But if you want like my favorite, let's say, exercise for impingement, if I had to just choose one, I would choose, you know, this one, right? The W's and the T's, where your forehead is resting on the floor, and this is more trap than rotator cuff focused. So but your rotator cuff is still working. So if I had to choose one, it would be that. Did you say fingerboards good for injury prevention? Yes. I thought they were really bad. No, it's how you use them. Absolutely not. They're brilliant. After how much time should you come back to the gym after an ankle sprain, 2nd degree? Yeah, well, it's good. 2nd degree sprains are the worst because you maybe didn't protect them as much as you should have because you were given wrong advice. You know, it's tough. If you broke your leg or had a 3rd degree, you'd be in a cast and a splint and all that kind of stuff, and you take the rehab really seriously. It's really hard. So it's going to depend. You will be in rehab for 6 to 9 months post injury for sure, without question. And you need to do higher level stuff like the knee things that I was showed in the presentation. You have to check your biomechanics. You have to do the drop and jumps. You have to do plyometrics at end stage rehab. You know, and if you're nowhere near that, well, then you have to get good mid-stage rehab, which is not just the bands. You know, you've got to do squats and heel raises, you know, with weight on your back, and shin work and wobble board. It's a recovery. I'm gonna have to start all that soon when I get my boot off. After how much time should you come back to the gym? Oh, that was that one. Yeah. Don't know if you'll have time. Cubital Tunnel. Yeah. Yeah, so Cubital Tunnel, they're annoying for sure. Do you have flicking of the ulnar nerve? Is there flicking? Or is it just pain in the cubital tunnel? No flicking. So then that's less complicated. So normally nerve conduction, yeah. So normally I've seen this is not uncommon at all. So ulnar nerve, you know, stretching and flossing, loosening up the scalenes. Like a common problem in climbers that I see that gets missed in with non-climbing therapists is the tension in the front of the neck and the scalenes and the first rib. Okay, and I had this issue with my ongoing shoulder problem in the past. And this can cause nerve issues. So the neck and shoulder is really important with that. Sometimes people have a very shallow groove and you're more kind of susceptible. Again, tension in the forearm where the ulnar nerve passes as well can contribute. So, you know, flexibility through here and you know, strengthening of the shoulder girdle to take the tension off the neck and the nerves. But yeah, it's kind of a tricky one, but you can work through it. I've seen it before. I have clicking in my right knee and don't want it to become painful. So yeah, it depends where the clicking is, because sometimes you can get like clicking or kind of shifting of the meniscus. And so and if it's not a serious like problem causing you trouble, you want to avoid the clicking. If it's clicking, you know, so you would do squats in a way that doesn't make it click or clunk. Like for instance, I've got I had 2 meniscectomies on my right knee. My left knee, I have a degenerative meniscal tear that clicks and so on. And I just don't do pistol squats. I can do every other squat. I just can't do pistol squats. So I don't do those. But if it's like clicking in the kneecap or the fat pad, you know, so it kind of depends on where the clicking is. But the simple answer would be don't make it click and do everything else, but don't avoid strengthening your knees. You know, if anything, I would strengthen your knees. I have both sides hamstrings glute pain. Gets painful when sitting on them. It all started when I started to run in power yoga. Yeah. Okay. So that does sound like, because if you have bilateral hamstring and glute pain, it could be coming from your back, L5, S1. But if you were doing power yoga and going a bit crazy during lockdown and like loads of like hamstring exercises, then yeah, you can overdo it for sure. And the sitting is a common complaint. So, you know, like really assessing the load and intensity, like I discussed, and trying to like do some work lying on your tummy so that you're not sitting on it. So offloading, you know, but again, you know, it's avoiding the kind of stretch. So if anything, you would kind of go the opposite way of this concentric training. So kind of more shortening rather than stretching. That could be a start. Not sure if this knows about has Dupuytren's. Yes, I see Dupuytren's quite a lot. So Dupuytren's is genetic, also I think related to smoking. And I actually had the start of Dupuytren's in this a long time ago. You can kind of see the remnants of it a little bit. I massaged the heck out of it and it went away. And stretched it loads, and because I'm hypermobile, it probably was easy for me to do that. It's not something that you need to worry about too much, but I definitely advise climbers to massage it out and to stretch as much as possible alongside the training, and to do this kind of like open hand back 3 stretched out strengthening, eccentric loading, I think is a good idea for that. That's what I recommend. I saw someone 2 weeks ago about that. I experienced pins and needles in one of my shoulder blades when hangboarding. Yeah, I would do some videos, you know, go and assess yourself on some of these things that I have on the Instagram account and see if you know, something could be worked on. And you know, totally, you know, like that left side where I was over pulling and not using my lat, I had a chronic point up here, which still needs loosening, but it does not bug me nearly as much as now that I've strengthened that lat, you know, to take the load. It's offloaded that mid rhomboid, and I don't get that kind of like naggy burny thing at the back anymore. So it could be that, but it's hard without assessing you. It could also be a stiff rib, which is really common in climbers. What should someone who is hypermobile pay attention? Yeah, so that's me. So it's the, you know, it's the really hypermobility at the, you know, and I've stiffened up in my hip joints now, which is great news. But, you know, so like half crimp training, open crimp training, sometimes taping the dip joint if you really hyperextend. The other common one is the elbows. So trying to keep the elbows a little bit bent. And an interesting one that you don't hear often is on side pulls. So there could be like this kind of thing where you like hyperextend your elbow. You kind of want to keep it a bit bent and the crease vertical in line with your wrist. So that's so watching your wrist and elbow position on side pulls. That's one that coaches, I find, don't talk about a lot, but they tend to know about the other hypermobile positions. So watch your elbow on side pulls.
I'll take this one last question, and then we'll let you go just in case your patient turns up.
Yeah, she's probably here now. Can squats and lunges cause quadricep pain? Yes, of course they could. So if you're super quad dominant and you have literally exhausted all the squat options, which I'm not sure you have because there's a ton, there is at least 20, then you would go with the hamstring, hip thrust, glute options. Any hip thrust, any bridge, any glute exercise. That's the way I would go with people who are really quad dominant. Okay, last one. I have multiple dislocations in my shoulder and my blade wings. Yeah, then you need to be doing all those like strengthening of the shoulder. So the plyometrics, this type of plyometric training, as long as it's not painful and you're doing well, but moving on from band work to doing more plyometric rotator cuff stuff is going to be really important. So this kind of these throw-in catches that I already presented a picture, and this is the back of the cuff. So these type of like plyometric type things stiffen up your tendons, like healthy stiffness. So anyone who's lax around the shoulder needs to be doing those, or like a version of.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nina. And we know that you have to go very soon. So thank you for answering all of those questions. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Nina is going to very kindly share her slides, and you'll all probably agree that there's a huge resource there on her Instagram page. So that's climbing_physiotherapy. And we'll put a link to that in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much to Adidas and 510 for enabling us to bring so many fantastic women speakers here to talk to you for completely free while we're all locked up in our homes. And just thank you all for coming. And we will now let Nina go off to see her patient. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Enjoyed it. Really nice to see you again. Bye.
Bye-bye.